Welcome back to Raptor-One.
Raptor-One, Voyagers of the Stars. Season 2, Chapter 6. The Shard in the Snow. The Door and the Fall. The Accord opened a door the way good carpenters open a wall, without leaving sawdust where it will betray a secret. A soft thread tugged Raptor-One off Grey River and down through the nebula's last green veils. There was no fanfare, no flare. Only that familiar pressure in the teeth that meant someone else was holding a string you agreed, for a time, to trust. Last pull, Ira whispered. Her fingers rested lightly on the NAV glass the way you test silk before you cut it. After this, we are under our own hands. Saran didn't touch the yoke yet. They listened to the Accord's thread finish its work. No hurry, no pride, and then slacken. The ship eased from guided to willing. The pocket of quiet closed behind them. Nearest three climbed the window, a world the color of a held breath. Sunlight shattered into sundogs and thin halo around a pale star. Clouds moved like muscle under a skin of ice. The night side wore aurora like a careful bruise. The data said ocean, entire, lit of ice, old. The eyes said winter that learned patience. Under ice ocean, Varric murmured, scanning heat maps that revealed nothing helpful on purpose. Kilometer thick in places. We can run on it. We can break through it. Doing both is how you die. Tessa's shard had learned to be useful on ships and in halls. Here it turned cold as if it had stepped outside without a coat. Not dead, alert. Listening. She tucked it into her collar and let it choose its temperature. Chiron had the receivers quiet. He cupped the absence like one holds a candle you have not lit. If the Autom had seeded the planet with listening thorns, phonon catchers buried where pressure made echoes clean, then speech, heat, and hurry would all be betrayals. Blind lens, Cyrus said softly. He palmed the drone and set it into its cradle where it watched without wanting to tell anyone. I'll keep witness. No shout. Darrow cinched the piece binding on his rifle and, at Saran's nod, wrapped Katrin's ugly, honest figure eight around the carry sling. If it goes to water, he said, we pull up, not back. Ira marked a descent path with the smallest corrections the ship knew how to obey. No burn, no flare, she said. We fall where wind falls. They fell. The first touch was not landing. It was the relief of a downdraft found and used well. Raptor-One rode it until the star's light thinned and the world's breath brushed the hull. The second touch was gravity. The third, the faintest skip, like a skater testing a lake with one foot. Contact, Saran said. Calm. The ship sighed. Everyone breathed. They settled on a shelf of blue-white that looked flat until you stared long enough to see its old arguments. Pressure ridges like frozen jaws, sastrugi daggers sculpted by decades of crosswind, black leads where the lid had cracked and refrozen so many times the ice was a palimpsest of winter. 2 kilometers east, Apollonia steamed, a black lung in the white. No smoke, no lights. The sound of the place was huge and intimate. A low, slow groan of ice settling on water like a house adjusting its weight. Homie, Cyrus said under his breath, and didn't smile with his mouth. Rules for cold and quiet. The Accord's rules for planets that heretofore well had sounded like superstition in the warm hall. Here they celebrated accuracy. No metal on metal in open air. Wrap it. Pat it. Touch with cloth first. No heat spikes. Warm slow, cool slower. Let steams be strangers. Count your steps when wind sings. The voice you hear is not yours. Talk in breaths. If you need more than a sentence, say it with hands. If the snow speaks in a voice you know, you are tired. Sleep now. They moved the way people move in a museum. Careful, reverent, whispering without deciding to. Varric and Ira deployed the sleds from belly stowage. Hushed runners of composite wrapped in sealskin, lash points padded with felt. Everything looked like it had been dressed for church. Varric routed heat from the sled batteries into sand-filled bladders first, then back to the cells. Heat is a liar here, he said, approving. We feed it gossip before we let it talk. Darrow checked snow anchors and rope. The coils were stiff with cold. He warmed them with his hands one length at a time, humming Tessa's simple count. In 2, out 4, until the fibers remembered they were supposed to help. He taught Cyrus to loop the panic-breaking sling with gloves on, because there's no point in knot work that refuses weather. Chiron laid out a line of tiny felted pucks the size of biscuits, each with a thin thread of carbon inside. Not beacons, he said, setting one gently into a shallow pocket of snow every 20 strides. Breadcrumbs that don't taste like food. If the Autom sweep this field, they'll read wind. Let wind eat our trail. Tessa walked to the edge of the first pressure ridge and laid her palm flat. The cold bit without apology. Beneath it, water talked. Not loud, old. She hummed under her breath. The note Crossgrit taught her, stubborn, plain, and felt the ice decide her hum was a thing it did not need to stop. Her shard pinged, then softened. A dog who has decided the new room is not a threat. Saran stood still and watched the horizon through a lens of quiet. The chair in their hollow did not appear on ice. This landscape had chosen a different posture for command. A hand lifted and put down slowly, a count done out loud, a rule spoken once and then obeyed because the place would punish the alternative faster than any captain could. 2 sleds, they said, pair by craft. Varric with Chiron, heat and habit. Darrow with Tessa, rescue and breath. I'll take point with Ira, thread and choice. Cyrus floats between. Here's what we don't, keeps witness. Blind lens, Cyrus repeated, because repetition is how you make a habit sturdier than a reflex. The first thorn. They found the first Autom thorn within 20 minutes and 300 steps. It lay in the armpit of a sastrugi like a red icicle someone had broken and pushed into the drift. Not big, a hand-length sliver with facets that drank morning. No glow, no hum. The air around it felt factual. Chiron didn't swear. He knelt on one knee at the upwind edge and held out a stripped glove so the thorn could feel the absence of skin before it felt skin. The shard in Tessa's collar went cold but did not flinch. Ira set a palm on Saran's forearm to keep her own breath slow. The doctrine inside the thorn wasn't words. It was a rubric scrolled into ice. All deviations are worth exactly 1 action. A tidy mind had written it. Chiron exhaled the question, what shape do you expect me to be? Then he supplied the wrong one. He became boring. Heat barely more than ice. Voice late to its own syllables. Crossgrit without music. The thorn's facets tilted. A faint plume of hoarfrost lifted off its edges like a sigh. Varric slid a padded sleeve over it and cinched it with an oil-dark strap. Not dead, he said. Dressed. We leave it, Saran said. We don't want a garden of red stumps behind us, Darrow agreed. They moved on. The listening hole. They camped for their first measure not because they were tired, but because listening is work. The Polinia steamed in the near distance, black water breathing in and out, slush making soft mouths against its edge. Iris steered them to a place where the ice was thick but not indifferent. Varric set a thermal curtain, canvas lined with a metallic whisper, so that the heat of their bodies would choose not to shout. Tessa took the hand auger from its padded sleeve. Metal on metal had been forbidden. Metal on ice could be invited if you talked to it right. She cut slowly, hands doing the unwelcome work of repetition, stopping each half turn so the blade could consider what came next. Darrow braced the shaft and watched the way the chips came up. Powder when the world was cold enough to help, curls when it wished they'd go home. When the tip went soft, thin water at the edge, Tessa stopped. The hole was the size of a palm and infinitely deep. Cold air breathed out of it like a rumor. Tessa lay on her stomach and put her ear near the opening without touching. Then she hummed, not down into it, but sideways across it, so the note would skim and ask, and maybe be invited in. Ira closed her eyes. The under-ice answered, slow as thought. A shape came back, a dome, perhaps, or a bowl, metal buried in midnight like a bell half-struck. Not far, not close, wrong for an Autom anchor, too imperfect. Do you hear it? Tessa whispered. Something that was made, Iris said, voice thin with wonder. Not by Autom, by someone who liked round things. Varric peered at the lip of the hole, breath a controlled cotton. We put heat down there, and thorns wake, he said. We put sound down there, and they listen back. We need a third thing. Chiron touched the edge with one gloved knuckle. Late, he said. We send a note that arrives after its own echo. Cyrus blinked. We can do that. Iris smiled without teeth. We already do. It's called being human. They tried. Tessa sang a plain tone, and then a second, half-breath late and a hair lower, so the under-ice would hear itself first and them later. Ira counted the reply, not the noise, the quiet. The bowl answered on the offbeat. Distance? Saran asked. Half a day on foot without getting clever, Ira said. A third if we cut corners. Cutting corners will make thorns curious. Half a day, Saran decided. We don't teach the ice our impatience. Heat and habit. They moved in a line as narrow as a thought. Varric breathed through his teeth as he tuned the sled battery's waist to a slow, steady leak that would look like weather. Every syncane of steps, he let one of Pell's little radiator fins flex late on purpose. Boredom as cloak. The ice approved. It groaned without alarm. Darrow and Tessa traded the lead on the second sled. When the snow turned to faceted glass, Darrow broke the microcrust with his boots and Tessa counted the rhythm that made stepping through look easy. When the snow became sugar, Tessa went first and Darrow drove the runner edge into a shallow channel so the sled wouldn't slew into a hungry mouth. They looked like people who'd been doing this together long enough to be impolite and effective. Cyrus floated, sometimes with Saran and Ira at the front, sometimes dropping back to Chiron and Varric to hand over the biscuit pucks for a stretch. He kept his voice for single words. Ridge. Lead. Stop. The drone sat on his shoulder like a patient bird. He resisted the urge to narrate into the wind until resisting turned into a kind of pride. Chiron listened to Fields. The thorns the Autom had grown in the pressure lines tended to hide where the wind scoured the snow away and left blue ice thinking too loudly. He found two before they found him, and each time Varric dressed them in oil dark, and each time Tessa hummed a plain tone so their quiet would have a posture other than fear. Saran did not set a heroic pace. They stopped when Ira said stop, for reasons that sounded like geometry had opinions about ethics. They moved when Darrow said move, for reasons that sounded like rope, like to work in warm hands. The world drew long around them. The sun slid a little and then stalled in its own tired orbit. The air made a sound like a bird with a broken wing and turned out to be ice shifting its mind about which way was down. The bell beneath. They reached a place the wind liked better than most. Sastrugi flowed around them like the ribs of a sleeping creature. Ira chose a hummocked lee and knelt without waking anything. Tessa opened a second listening hole. This time, when she hummed sideways, the answer came closer and sure. a round hall underweight, walls that remembered hands, a tone that had been held for a century and wanted, politely, to be let go. Radiant, she breathed. Or the chamber it refuses to leave, Chiron said, because someone had to be the question. Darrow tied a door-hold knot around a pressure ridge and hooked a line through it. If the ice decided to argue, they would have something to argue back with that wasn't a rifle. Varric ran one gloved finger around the hole's rim and frowned. 2 layers, he said. Top ice old. Bottom ice new. Somebody harvested here once, and the sea took the scar and covered it with glass. Ira waved her fingers over the opening, not touching, watching frost rhyme and melt and rhyme again. We can drop a microphone, she said, if it doesn't smell like power. Chiron tapped the felt pouch at his belt. I can braid carbon and wool into a cable that thinks it's a rope. Give me a weight that isn't metal. Darrow took a chunk of ice from the lee and wrapped it in cloth like a wrapped sweet. Here, he said, if we drop it, it becomes the room again. Tessa's shard warmed against her throat as if it approved of manners. They fed the cable into the hole hand over hand, counting, stopping, letting the under-ice forget they were touching it. At 20 meters, they heard nothing. At 30, a hum like a cup rubbed with a wet finger. At 50, an overtone that would have been dissonance if it were not so patient. Here, Ira whispered. She looked like a woman at a locked door deciding which part she wanted to knock. This is the skin. Saran crouched, breath making a small cloud. Tomorrow we go down, they said. No heroics. No suddenness. We sleep and learn first. The wind rose a fraction. The listening cable shivered and then steadied. On the far horizon, beyond the low swell of snow like the sea remembering the day it froze, a red glint stitched the air and vanished. Not a sweep. Something noting a deviation somewhere else and deciding to be late to its own conclusion. Chiron's head tilted. They're measuring a different room, he said. We are not yet the story. Let's not audition, Saran said. Camp. They set the thermal curtain low in a hollow and let their warmth decide to stay. Varric bled what little waste the batteries had into sand. Ira marked wind, so its habit would find them again in the morning. Darrow rigged a line from sled to person so no one would wander off if the world moved while they slept. Tessa sang the plainest lullaby she knew to a piece of ice with a kernel of weight inside it. Cyrus lay on his back and watched the aurora do mathematics on the cold, and the fact that no one was watching him do it did not empty him. It filled him differently. Chiron took first watch with the clay token in his pocket and the confession beside it. He looked down into the small, dark mouth of the listening hole and didn't whisper anything that he wouldn't want the room to keep. Saran's last act before sleep was to lift the quiet band at Tessa's throat and feel that it was still cold. If it ever warmed wrong, they would throw it into a sea, even if they had to make one. The wind moved the smallest amount. The habit of the dark turned a page. Under them, a room hummed like a bell the ocean had not finished ringing. Something in it wanted to be asked correctly, not forced, not lit. Tomorrow would be for learning how to knock. The knock. Morning arrived the way cold brings light, slow, with a blue that looks like patience rather than promise. The wind had shifted half a point. The sastrugi had grown a finger. The listening hole kept its shape as if the night had decided to let them stay. They worked without speech at first. Habit has a grammar. Varric checked the sled batteries and bled a breath of heat into the sand bladders, watching for the telltale twitch of steam. None. Good. He wrapped 2 carabiners in felt until they looked like toys. No metal on metal, he muttered. The lesson you say out loud so your hands don't forget. Darrow laid out the ropes and slings. Katrin's door hold knot went between two pressure ridges, a patient figure eight that would release on a single pull. He ran his gloved fingers along the fibers as if reading a prayer in Braille. Anchors, then bodies, he said, soft enough for just the rope to hear. Ira traced a circle in the snow with a mittened hand around the listening hole. This is the room, and then a smaller circle within it. This is you. She held a moment of silence the way she would hold a star at the eyepiece, not to capture it, to remember what it looked like when you didn't yet have a word for it. Tessa warmed her hands under her armpits and laid them briefly over her shard. It had not warmed with the dawn. It wasn't refusing, it was minding itself. She liked that. Chiron composed two questions and then erased them in his head. Certainty makes poor company in rooms that are already telling you what they are. Cyrus strapped the blind drone to his chest and clipped a second line from it to his harness. He half smiled at the thought that, for once, if he fell, the camera would fall with him and there would be no cutaway. Saran checked each buckle, each loop, each face. We go in two, they said. Ira with me first, then Tessa with Darrow, Chiron with Varric last. Cyrus floats between pairs, no heroics. If the ice says stop, we stop. Talk in breaths, Ira reminded, smiling without her teeth. Or with hands. Tessa lay prone at the hole again, ear near the opening. She didn't hum yet. Listening before speaking is not silence, it's courtesy. The under ice had changed, in the way a sleeping house changes when it knows its people are awake. Not louder, more alert. She hummed a single plain tone, then let it fall away and listened to the echo return not to her, but past her, as if the room were checking its own shape before greeting guests. Saran met Ira's eye. They set their crampinless boots at the hole's rim and lowered themselves on the line with the care of people who have learned that gravity rewards good manners. The cold in the shaft rose like a polite stranger offering to take your coat. Water and bone. They touched the lake the way a fingertip touches the surface of a glass when you're trying not to make a ring. The first contact wasn't even wet, it was inference. The second was the ring itself, a fragile shrug that spread and smoothed. Rope holds, Darrow said above, voice a single warm exhale. Saran and Ira made their small splashes in the shadow of the hole and eased to the side, boots finding ice underwater. The world below the lid was not darkness. It was a kind of thick twilight that water makes when it agrees to carry light farther than it has to. Particulate hung in slow fall, glittering without apology. The wall of ice on one side rose like a cathedral column with 1,000 years of blue pressed into it. On the other side, open water, calm, the ceiling a silver mirror. Ira took one careful breath through the rebreather mouthpiece Varric had rigged from quiet parts and bitter experience. Air tasted like a coin. Sounds clean, she whispered around it. No chatter, no thorns nearby. Saran measured the weight of the line with one hand, the weight of the room with their hollow. We move along the wall, they said. No kicks, no heroics. Count your breaths. They did not swim so much as lean. Water allowed them forward the way a crowded room allows you to pass when you make yourself small. Ira's gloved fingers skimmed the ice. Lines ran through it like veins. Ancient stress, new freeze, the memory of other holes cut and healed. At 10 meters along, her fingertips stuttered over a patch that felt wrong, then right, as if the ice were hiding a door it had learned to become. Here, she breathed. They stopped. The underice murmured. It was not language. It was a bowl waiting for a question that wouldn't pretend to know its own answer. Ask, Saran said. Ira hesitated and then smiled at herself for hesitating. She didn't ask, what are you? Doors don't answer that. She asked, with her palm flat on the ice. Where do you lead? The echo didn't come back to her. It came back past her again, as if it had somewhere else to be. A resonance ran along the wall, a low, steady line like a string tuned down until it wants to be plucked. Down and left, Iris said. Slow. It wants slow. They followed the long curve until the wall bulged outward into the suggestion of a dome. The seam where old ice met new was a moth's wing thin. Beyond it, the water grew darker in a way that didn't mean danger so much as depth with intention. Saran reached up, squeezed the line twice. We are well, and felt 2 answering squeezes from above. Bring the second pair, they said, and their voice traveled up the rope like heat through hands. The choir of 2. Tessa and Darrow descended. The cold took Tessa's breath and then returned it, borrowed, not stolen, and she thanked it in her head like a host. Darrow grunted as water found his collar. Then he steadied with a sound that might have been a swear and might have been a prayer. Tessa touched the wall beside Ira's palm and waited. The ice accepted her hand the way stone accepts a candle's heat, acknowledgement without concession. She hummed the plainest note she knew, and then, because Crossgrid had taught her the power of late, she hummed again a fraction off, quieter, as if repeating a question you're not sure you asked with enough kindness the first time. Something behind the seam answered, not louder, nearer. The line in the wall flexed like a tendon. Darrow lifted the wedge Varric had made, a tool from composite and patience, wrapped so no hard sound would ride it. He placed it at the seam and looked to Saran. On your mark, he said. Saran listened for doctrine, the Autom kind, the kind that wants the world to explain itself into neatness. None. Only water holding its breath like a friend sharing a secret. On one, they said, and if it doesn't want to open, we stop. One, Darrow breathed. He leaned. Not a strike, pressure. The wedge kissed the seam and then pushed it the way a shoulder can ask a door to consider. The ice did not crack. It remembered. The thin plane of new freeze separated with the softest of sighs. A bead of older, darker water bulged through and then settled as if the room were taking the first breath it had allowed itself in a century. A round entry not big enough for arrogance opened. Cyrus, Saran murmured, and the showman who was learning when not to show slid into the rope's place, feeding slack and holding heartbeat. Within, the chamber beyond the seam welcomed them as water welcomes falling things, by making room. It wasn't large, not by cathedral standards. By human standards, it was large enough to be humble in. A dome of ice above, rippled like cloth, a floor that was not floor but a lattice of old kelp frozen in place. And at the center, anchored by cables that had learned the language of pressure, a sphere. Not smooth, not Autom perfect. Its skin was made from plates the size of dishes, each one a slightly different moon gray. Where the plates met, a seam like the one they'd opened traced a path you couldn't follow all the way with the eye. Cables ran from the sphere to the dome and back, their slack intentional. There were old, patient scratches where hands had once worked, not erasing mistakes, but using them. Tessa's shard warmed by a breath and then cooled again, as if telling her yes, but gently. Ira made a small shape with her hand that meant beautiful doesn't mean friendly and friendly doesn't mean yours. Saran's hollow went very still. Radiant? Darrow whispered and swallowed the second word that wanted to come. Finally. Chiron and Varric slipped in as the last of the seam let them through. Chiron's eyes narrowed, not in suspicion, calculation without greed. He did not ask what does it do or how do we make it ours. He asked the question that doesn't close the room. What do you need us to be to hear you? The sphere gave no light. It gave a sense of attention, not animal, not machine, room. Tessa cupped a hand and let her breath go as a stream of small bubbles rather than words. The bubbles wandered and then gathered along a curve in the sphere's plates, as if iron filings pulled by an invisible magnet. The curve wasn't the seam. It was a path. Questions only, Tessa said softly. No answers. Saran nodded. No commands. No claims. Cyrus touched the drone and pointed its eye at the floor, not the sphere. Witness without theft. Asking without owning. They tried a question badly first, so they could watch it fail and not be ashamed of failing later. What are you? Darrow asked, too quickly, and the water took the shape of his impatience and spread it like a stain. Nothing changed. Again, Saran said, no edge. Ira put her palm near the plates and asked, where do your edges end? The echo returned not as sound, but as a hesitation. Do yours? And Ira blinked and laughed helplessly because fair is fair. It answers with a mirror, she whispered. Not to trap, to check posture. Chiron tried next, and because he knows what it is to interrogate, he interrogated less. Who left you here? He asked, the words as quiet as confession. The sphere's plates quivered, no movement, just intention. The answer came as a shape rather than a name. Hands with webs between the thumb and forefinger, shoulders built for water, a throat that hummed more easily than it spoke. Not choir, neighbors. The chamber remembered them in the way Glacier remembers a summer. Tessa's eyes filled. They shaped room for song, she breathed. Not radiant. Or, maybe, radiant that needs a choir. Varric ran his glove a millimeter above the plates. Joints float. He murmured, a man admiring hingework. They want pressure shifts. They don't want to be forced. Saran touched the seam with 2 fingers and asked, can we help you do what you are already doing? A long pause. Then a sensation in the cables like a chord from a quiet instrument. You can keep time while we remember the melody. Ira lifted her hands. We can do that, she said, smiling small and true. We can count. The count. Counting in water is different. Sound travels fast. Patience travels faster if you let it. Tessa hummed low, not into the plates, but near them, so the note would arrive late after its own echo. Ira followed a hair above, then a hair below, an unpretty weave that made room rather than aim for beauty. Chiron did not join. He listened, so he could hear when their questions were turning into statements. Cyrus kept time with 2 fingers on his harness. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, rest. Varric found the cable that quivered in sympathy and laid his palm beside it. He did not add pressure. He let his arm shake very slightly. Human oscillation. As if to tell the chamber we are not steady, but we are consistent. Darrow anchored the rope to a kelp-frozen rib and drifted at the dome's edge watching the seam they had come through, because someone needed to. He counted 2. Breaths, not beats. Saran stood where all of that could be seen at once and chose not to direct. Choosing not to direct when the room will punish bravado is a kind of command. The first response was not grand. A plate sighed along its seam and settled into a posture it had been too cold to remember yesterday. A second answered in another quadrant. A ripple ran through the cables. Water said yes without using the word. They kept the count. Ira let her note wobble on purpose, a tiny human error. The sphere's answer accommodated rather than corrected. Tessa followed the wobble, turned it into an invitation. The chamber warmed by a degree no thermometer could admit. The plates were not opening. They were arriving. The shard at Tessa's throat pulsed once. It did not try to lead. It registered, present. The band at her neck stayed cold. Good. Chiron whispered at last, to the plates and perhaps to himself. We're not here to take. We're here to be changed correctly. One section of the sphere bloomed. No brighter, no looser. Just harmonized with the water like a voice agreeing with a room's acoustics. A pattern emerged in the seams. Ira's eyes widened. That's a script, she breathed. Not letters. Timings. Varric chuckled low. Of course the thing writes in time. Can you read it? Saran asked. Not yet, Ira said. But I can count it. The question that doesn't close. Rooms that desire questions will answer what you ask about yourselves first. Tessa learned this from choir elders and experience with doors that open inward. Why won't you kindle? She asked the sphere and then corrected herself. Because why closes the room? What posture do you need us to hold so you can do what you are? The answer moved through the plates like breath under cloth. We kindle when the asking does not require being seen. The water pressed into their bones like a hand that loves you enough to tell you a hard thing. We are for people who sing to each other where sound carries without spectacle. Cyrus flinched. It was not the sting of insult. It was the sting of a mirror that doesn't know you and is still right. He didn't argue. He touched the drone, dark, blind, and nodded to the sphere. Witness without shout, he whispered, cheeks hot in water that could not care less. A second line resolved across the plates. Ira counted it and felt it sort itself into a map. Not the land above, the lake, paths of pressure, gardens of silence, rooms with cedar-like resonance where sound would graze and grow. She pointed, careful and slow. That, she said to Saran, is the choir this chamber wants. Not 20 voices. Maybe 7. Saran's mouth did the smallest of things. Then we brought the right number. They kept the count. Tessa's hum slid lower until it met the lake's own patience. Ira read the timing lines like an astronomer reading the heavens after a power outage. Varric held a cable and thought of ugly knots that held doors because they told the truth. Darrow watched the seam, watched the rope, watched the swell of the hole above as if watching could be a blessing. Chiron built a question and took it apart twice, then offered the third version only to the room. What would you be, he asked, if we left you unchanged? The cable's long cord did not dim. It held. Then the plates replied with a polite uncertainty. We would be a bell no one rings right. We would be a door asking a question no one hears. A pause, as if the room itself hated presumption. We are better when we are asked by people who have learned what to leave alone. Saran exhaled a breath they hadn't been aware of holding. Then we will leave alone what we cannot carry, they said, letting the words be heard by 3 audiences. The chamber, the crew, and the captain in their hollow who had to choose between Radiant and people yesterday and chose people. Something small and final clicked, not a sound, a decision. The seam nearest Tessa loosened just enough to admit a hand. Inside, something waited, not a core, not a power cell, a seed, smooth as an egg, warm as breath. It was not the radiant itself. It was the chamber's way of saying, if you can carry a candle without thinking it a sun, carry this. Tessa looked to Saran, eyes startling in the water light. Saran did not reach. They nodded once to Darrow. Darrow slid forward, slow as a thought, and stopped with his hand hovering. Ask it permission, he said to Tessa, sounding surprised at himself. Tessa did, not with words. The seed warmed the glove through. Yes, but gently. Varric produced a cloth pouch from nowhere, the way men like him always have a thing at the exact right moment. No hard edges, he warned, smiling in that cornered way. No sudden heat. Tessa guided the seed into the pouch, supporting it as if it were a person standing after too long sitting. The pouch made it less a prize, more a responsibility. The chamber around them did not dim. It seemed relieved. "We have not been emptied," it said in its way. "We have been heard." Up. They left the room the way good guests leave kitchens, clean, quiet. Exactly a chair's worth of space different than when they arrived. Darrow eased the wedge free and pressed the seam back together with the heel of his hand until water agreed again with ice. Ira let the timing lines blur in her head to keep from stealing their shape. Chiron tucked the 3 questions he hadn't asked back into the pocket where he kept the blank clay token. Varric patted the cable as if praising a patient engine. Cyrus looked down at the drone and felt proud of the nothing it had taken. They rose on the rope, not because they were done, but because the room had given them a beat, and the beat said rest now. The hole above showed sky like a coin in a wishing well. The cold met them as equals on the way up. At the rim, Darrow's arm and Tessa's shoulders worked as one. Pull, brace, pull, to bring Saran and Ira back to air. The wind had shifted again. Nothing dramatic, just enough to remind them the world is not theirs. They gathered under the thermal curtain out of the slight gust and held the pouch between them like something alive, which it was. The seed warmed Tessa's palms as if to say, "Well done, now don't ruin it." "Not kindled," Chiron said. "Not a radiant made ours. A fragment entrusted." "A candle," Iris said, eyes shining with that clean ache she gets when wonder is honest. "From a bell under ice." Varric sniffed, and the wet second that followed, it was not about cold. "Ugly holds," he said gruffly. "That room's hingework." "Was perfect," Cyrus finished softly, "in the way that forgives us for not being." Darrow looked to Saran, waiting for the line to draw the next line. Saran met each gaze in turn. "We don't light it here," they said. "We don't light it on the ship. We carry it to the Accord's pocket and ask a hall to help us ask correctly. If this is a radiant seed, it kindles in a room made for it, not under a camera or under a hunger." Tessa exhaled through her nose, a bright sound in the cold. "Thank you." "Also," Saran added, "because the sky is never just sky for long, we do it quickly. The Autom tested a tooth of the gate near here. They will be late, but not forever, and we would rather tell this story in a room with doors." Chiron's head tilted. The air had that distant tautness again, the way a field feels before doctrine tries to explain it into a grid. "Late," he said, "but closing." "Pack," Darrow said, already reeling rope with fingers that knew what came next when orders didn't need to. They stowed the lines, the wedges, the habits. Varric sealed the listening hole with a plug of loose snow and a circle of canvas to teach it to stay. Ira took one last breath over the opening. "Thank you," she thought, and the under ice, being not a person but still capable of courtesy, hummed the shape of your welcome. Cyrus donned the drone as if it were a shawl and turned his face to the horizon. "Blind lens," he said, to remind himself what withstood vanity. The drone purred, empty as a good bowl. Saran cinched the pouch to Tessa's harness, not to their own. Leadership leaves treasures with the person who will treat them as questions. "Home," Saran said, meaning the Accord's hall and the table with 7 bowls and the rules on the wall. They stepped onto the sled runners, and the ice sang under them like old wood. The wind, late to its own conclusion, gentle but not forgiving, shifted 2 degrees. Behind them, under the lid of winter, a room returned to keeping time. Ahead, the habit of the dark began to turn its page toward after. The wake. They broke camp with the manners cold requires. Ropes coiled without complaint. The listening hole wore a plug of canvas and snow. The seed rode at Tessa's chest in Varric's cloth pouch, warm as a kept word. Wind had shifted again, 2 degrees crueler, 5 degrees more honest. Ira held her palm out of the curtain and let it decide which way the air wanted to travel. North and a breath east, she murmured. It will try to hurt us. We go with it until we can go around it. Chiron lifted a felted puck, listened to what the field refused to say, and nodded once. Thorns are waking early. He was right. At first it was only a change in the way the world held sound. Tighter, less forgiving. Then a red fleck resolved out of the white where wind had shaved snow down to blue glass. A sliver of autumn geometry, half buried, patient as a blade forgotten in a drawer. A second glinted farther on. A third. Field, Darrow said, voice a breath. Teeth. Varric crouched, glove hovering over the nearest thorn without touching. Can dress one, he muttered. Maybe 3. A field eats sleeves for breakfast. Tessa's shard cooled again, not afraid, prudence. She touched it with the back of her glove, and the seed warmed her sternum in reply, comfort and warning both. Saran looked over the plain. Thorns hid where the wind told them to. Lee of sastrugi, low blue bowls. A wrong sound would make the grid hum awake. A loud heat would call the keepers listening curtain down like weather. No metal on metal, Saran said, as much to the part of their own body that wanted to hurry as to the crew. No heat spikes. Talk in breaths. We go late, plain, stubborn. Cyrus touched the drone, felt it purblind against his jacket, and swallowed the itch to narrate. Witness without shout, he reminded himself. Pairs as before, Saran continued. Ira with me on the thread. Darrow with Tessa, rescue and breath. Chiron with Varric, habit and spite. Cyrus floats. If the field says stop, we stop. They mounted the sleds. Runners whispered against sugared snow. The first line. Ira traced a path that wasn't a path so much as an apology offered to the wind. Step where it steps, she said. Where it doesn't, we don't. The line took them onto a hard pan where the snow had been scoured to a smooth, dull sheen. Beneath, ice thought too loudly. Chiron's head cocked. He could feel the rubrics the Autom had written into pressure and crystal. Count. Classify. Erase. Doctrine never needed to raise its voice to be cruel. Tessa began the cross-grit the medians had taught. Not loud, not pretty, late by half a breath, the kind of hum a person uses to steady a frightened animal. Ira laid a thinner thread under it. Varric adjusted battery waste into a long, boring slope. Darrow's job was rope and watch. He watched. They crossed the first vein without waking it. The second hummed once, tasted Tessa's late note, and chose not to care. Good, Chiron said, voice a shadow of approval. Keep being boring. Best compliment I've ever earned, Cyrus whispered. The slip. Half a click on, the wind cut around a set of sastrugi shaped like broken ribs. The sleds nosed into a shallow trough. The snow looked solid where it had decided not to be. Darrow's runner dipped, caught, and the sled yacht. A hard clink, small as fingernails tapping a glass, rang under the noise of breath. Everyone froze. Not movie frozen. Field frozen. Under the blue skin, something woke. Red lines went from probability to fact. A low, thrumming grid pretended asleep, now listening. Count, Ira breathed. In 2, Tessa said immediately, voice a human metronome. Out 4. 1, 2. Darrow slid his weight back. The way you back out of an apology you mean and don't want to make worse. He didn't yank the sled. He asked it. The runner freed with a soft hush and did not scrape again. The grid pressed, uncertain. Chiron felt its question form, identify, and laid his palm flat on the air, answering with posture instead of signal. civilian, derelict, boring. Varric fed the battery waste into duller, later heat. The field tasted and, grudgingly, decided not to ask twice. They breathed out together, slow enough not to fog the air. Darrow flexed his hands on the drive bar. My fault, he said, and didn't dress the confession as anything else. No blame, Saran replied. Only next. They moved. The plane. The thornfield broadened into a white that discouraged thought. Red slivers hid in the bowls between sastrugi waves. The grid beneath made a low expectation. Autumn doctrine approaches holiness when it's written into weather. You will be as we measure. Shade their certainty, Chiron murmured. Tessa and Ira shaded, the way a hand shades a candle without smothering it, not resisting, not yielding, making the doctrine late to its own conclusions. Varric's spite became craft. Every 20 steps, he made a fin somewhere in the system flex wrong on purpose. The heat curve looked tired, not deceitful. It's the difference between a liar and a citizen with bad knees. Cyrus carried the blind drone between pairs, trading small signals with his hands. Ridge, bull, step, stop. He had never felt more visible and less seen, and for once that felt like a correct way to exist. Darrow moved as if the field were watching, because it was. He placed his boots where Ira's finger indicated, kept rope between sleds easy, ready to catch and release without making a new noise. They made a second line, then a third. A red fleck tasted them and didn't wake its neighbors. The plane learned their rhythm the way a house learns footsteps and stops thinking the floor is storm. Lake can save, Ira whispered. Varric grunted. Late is saving. The herd. Where the field narrowed between two old pressure ridges, doctrine flowed like cattle through a gate. The air took on that tight, cold pressure the keeper's curtain made when it sniffs through metal for a heartbeat pretending to be absent. Curtain in the distance, Chiron warned. We've got 40 counts before the edge brushes us. Saran didn't speed up. No change, they said. Change writes new story. We stick to boring. Tessa dropped her hum half a breath again. Ira drifted it under to meet. Varric flattened heat into a long, uninteresting sigh. Darrow tightened his grip on the bar and then loosened it so his hands wouldn't tell on his nerves. Cyrus counted with teeth and tongue, 1, 2, 3, 4, finding pride again in the stupid usefulness of numbers. The curtain's edge investigated like a clerk who doesn't want to be there. It found the thorns dressed in oil-dark sleeves. It found heat curves that looked like a patient machine instead of prey. It found a late hum that didn't rebut, only asked the doctrine to wait for itself. It moved on. They didn't look after it. People who look after danger tell the field where their eyes are. At the fourth ridge, Iris signaled to stop, 2 fingers, palm down. She tilted her head. Hear that? No one did at first. Then, distant, off to the west, a hollow boom rolled under the ice like a drum struck in some other room. Not autumn, weather. A flow shifting its mind. The field around them relaxed half a point. It had something else to measure now. Go while it's distracted, Chiron said. They went. The nearing. The farther edge of the plane wore fewer slivers and more arguments, rifts and heaves, the ice's old quarrels made visible. Beyond, the shelf lifted toward low hills where wind broke itself into harmless tatters. Beyond that, a sheen that meant hardpack and home if your home was a ship with scarred paint and warm air. The thorns didn't end so much as lose interest. The last red fleck hid under a cornice like a lazy tooth. Tessa's shard had warmed a fraction with the work and now cooled, the way a hand cools after pulling someone out of water. Stop, Saran said, one palm low. They stood on runners and listened not to the field, but to their own bodies. Hands shook. Teeth ached with the held hum. Rope marks on gloves had imprinted new lines on skin. Count 10, Iris said. Not to delay, to honor. They counted. On 7, the wind agreed. The pull back. They reached Raptor-One in a longer hour than it had taken to leave her. Sleds slid into the belly. Varric palmed the hatch and felt the familiar bone hum of ship extend into them like a house, saying, "You smell like outside. Come in anyway." Inside, the air stung with warmth like a slap that forgives immediately. They moved through de-icing with the care of people who know a ship can hurt you with love if you rush it. Darrow hung the ropes to dry and flattened each coil with his palms as if blessing them. Chiron set the felted pucks on a rack by the door and resisted the urge to categorize them into neatness. Ira leaned her forehead against the NAV glass and let her breath fog it, then wiped it clean with the back of a mitten. Cyrus unclipped the blind drone and set it down facing a wall because a wall makes a better witness than a window when you're not ready to tell yet. Tessa uncinched the pouch and held the seed in 2 hands so everyone could see it and no one could mistake what it was for. Varric set the kettle on the smallest heat coil and smiled at himself for choosing the smallest. No spikes, he said to no one, to everyone. Saran waited until mugs of tea had warmed 7 sets of fingers and the ache in their hollows had stopped translating into orders. "We have a candle," they said simply, "not a sun. We will ask the Accords Hall to help us ask correctly how to kindle it, or whether to leave it unlit until the room that made it asks us again." Tessa nodded, eyes stinging with something hotter than the mug. "We keep what we named." Darrow looked at the peace binding on his rifle and did not untie it. "Late saved," he said, a small concession to faith. Chiron turned the blank clay token between forefinger and thumb, then put it away. "We're still boring to the right enemies," he said dryly. "Let's keep it." Ira smiled with the tired light. "That means wonder survived. The chamber below will keep counting without us," she said. "That's good." "Ugly holds," Varric repeated, and the 3rd time he said it in as many days. The words sounded almost like a blessing. Cyrus leaned back, ran a hand through his hair, and grinned small and true. "My audience," he said, "will hear this one late." "Good," Saran said. "Let them learn that late can save." Departure. They prepped for dark ascent as if rehearsing a song. Varric folding the heat shed in place in case a sweep sniffed their climb. Ira plotting a path that rode habits rather than lanes. Chiron killing every receiver twice. Darrow checking knots that held doors closed and people together. Tessa humming plain and low until the ship's hum found hers. Cyrus setting the drone to archive with a delay. Saran touching each shoulder because some rituals are not for an audience and matter more that way. The ship lifted without flourish. No spike, no boast. The plane below offered no complaint. The Thornfield did not look up. The Polanya breathed and let them go. Clouds took back their muscle and color. Sun rode a thin line along the wing. When the Accord's thread caught their bow like a tug's line catching a stubborn barge, no one said thank you out loud. They had learned when thanks is better sent as posture. The pocket's ring unfolded from dark, patient, and exact. The corridor's ribs sang a note that tasted like clean water. The hall would be lamps and rules and 7 bowls. The seed would find a room that knew how to hold a question without needing to answer it yet. Saran looked at their crew, all of them, 7 of them, and allowed themselves a private luxury. The smallest exhale that admits relief without erasing the work left to do. "Home," they said, meaning the place that keeps time for you while you learn to keep it for others. Raptor-One answered with a change in pitch that said, "I hear you." They went in.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to be notified about upcoming releases to the Raptor-One series, please subscribe. This has been a Bad Karma Drone production.